So why is the Somme so important then? Why is it so significant? The casualty figures for the 1st of July are terrible, and Tim cited them already, but over 200,000 Irishmen take part in the war, and many thousands die from every county in Ireland. So why is the 1st of July 1916 so important, and why has it become almost more important? I cite the fact that when I first visited the Thiepval monument to the Ulster Division in France way back in the 1980s, I had to struggle to get a key of the place by visiting a local village. If I went nowadays, I'd find that it was the site of a pilgrimage, and pilgrimage is the word. Tens of thousands of people go there every year. Some people go several times, usually from, they're not exclusively, of course, a Unionist or Loyalist background. Well, I'll try to address some of the things. I think one thing to bear in mind is that the Ulster Volunteer Force before the war looked like it was set upon rebellion against was certainly against the Liberal government policy. Now, whether they would have taken on the British Army or the British Army taken on them in 1914 is another matter, had the First World War not broken out. But nonetheless, the claims of Owen McNeill that the North began, that perhaps the UVF were set on a rebellious, separatist tendency ultimately, were put firmly in the box as far as Unionists were concerned by that sacrifice, and I use the word sacrifice, on the 1st of July. With blood they wrote their loyalty. So I think, that becomes an incredibly important day, in part for that reason. I think, secondly, the division itself, though, is as the war goes on, there's a very diverse membership of it. And indeed, from the start, as Tim said, we even have Catholics in the division. It's certainly not unanimously and totally a UVF division. Nonetheless, the structure of it is formed along the structure of the old Ulster Volunteers when the battalions are set up. And there's a strong Orange Order presence within it, and Orange Lodges are founded within the division. When they marched past the City Hall in May 1915, in one of the most remarkable days in the city centre, that division going through past the City Hall, taking the salute, if you like, represents and embodies and incarnates an Ulster identity in many, many ways, each battalion representing a different part of the geography of the incipient Northern Ireland, albeit that in 1921 the three southern and western counties of Ulster get left out of the partition arrangement. And it's perfectly clear, if you look at the way Australia found the war to be, and the militarization of that period, and the putting on of uniforms to be an important moment in the evolution of an Australian identity. Something similar, I think, is going on when you see the Ulster Division march past the City Hall on their way, ultimately, to the Battle of the Somme. As far as the Somme is concerned, the 1st of July, of course, is on the old pre-Gregorian calendar, the day of the Battle of the Boyne. And some men would have been aware of that. Many were aware of it, I think. And the wearing of sashes going into battle takes on a particular resonance, a mythic resonance for that particular reason. When the war is over, the creation of war memorials is very important, and you only have to look at the accounts in newspapers of these to see the way in which the battle at the Somme is taking on a special significance. For people like James Craig, the new Premier, for example, whenever the war memorial is opened in Coleraine and dedicated, members of the Special Constabulary line up. And he makes rhetoric, he delivers speeches that indicate very much that he sees the Somme and its story as being about a foundation for this fragile new entity that is being set up called Northern Ireland in a contested environment, and therefore gaining great significance. Look at the Larne War Memorial, and you will see there, for example, McCalmont is involved. A man called McCalmont is involved in the dedication of it, someone who was heavily involved as a key figure in the local Ulster Volunteer Force. So the political colour of unionism on the Great War generally, but in the Somme in particular, is given fresh intensity. And let's look, for example, at closer to here, the City Hall, whenever the cenotaph, or if you want to call it the War Memorial, goes up in the grounds of City Hall. It's situated next door to a sacred building for unionism, the place where Carson signed the Covenant. And it's situated next door to the statue of the Marquis of Dufferin and Ava, a great presiding imperial and diplomatic figure. And so for many of these reasons, I think, we get a strong sense as the years go by of the Somme becoming a founding story for Northern Ireland in the way that the Easter Rising is for the South, for the infant Irish Free State. Then, just looking at the years of crisis from 1969 onwards, if I may, I think that there are several reasons why the Somme story grows in intensity. For a start, we have to take into account that during the years of Troubles, there is an incredible militarization of many in the Protestant community, joining the police force, reserve police, UDR, RIR, army, prison officers. Then there are paramilitaries, UVF, UDA, Red Hand Commando, and their families. The whole experience of the Troubles is one of, for many, a sense of militarization of their lives in what was, and thankfully we hopefully have left it behind, but a grim and violent period of our history. And I think, therefore, that story of a man in uniform that goes up on the mural, on the wall, on the gable end in many communities is a reflection of that. And the interest in finding out more about that period reflects some of the stuff I've just mentioned to you. Some paramilitary groups use the Somme as a conflict resolution strategy. I'm thinking of Gusty Spence and the UVF, seeing it as a way of embracing a culture and a history and moving towards a more civilianized life in a period of ceasefires. People have said to me, and I work with many groups for whom the story of the Somme is vital and crucial. People talk about the need for a people's history. People will say, I was never taught at school about anything other than Queen Elizabeth and Julius Caesar. This is a story about what happened on my street to my family, and it fills a need for people who very often were obliged to take on, or felt obliged to take on, hierarchical stories from somewhere else about the lord of the manor and the person who ran things from the very top, rather than on the street level. I think with the arrival of EasyJet and the ability of genealogy on an ad hoc or a more intensive basis, genealogy programs on TV, many people have been able in the Loyalist and Unionist communities to embrace this story for themselves and do good things in terms of finding out. Just coming to a close in a couple of minutes. Are there mythologies about the Somme, either in the sense of lies about it or just simply big mythic stories? Well, I've tried to show you that in the sense of a big mythic paradigmatic story, yes, the Somme matters a great deal, and especially so, I think, in a community which has been under huge stress politically and culturally in recent years. In terms of lies, I'm not so sure that lies now, are deep falsehoods or untruths. I think many people in Loyalist communities, Unionist communities, are very interested in stories of nationalism. I know of groups from intensely Loyalist backgrounds who make a point of visiting sites connected to nationalists who fought in the war and showing respect to that. I think there's an awareness increasingly that the story is more complex than what it had been before, and there's more of an awareness, I think, of the detail. And I think that's hopefully all to the good. And finally, one story that has done the rounds, though, and I encountered it just last week with a group, and this is the story. We were placed, the Ulster Division up the Somme, in that difficult part of the line, in that particular place where it was going to be likely to be a place of slaughter. And that was done in order to get rid of or neuter the rebellious Ulster Unionists. Now, I don't think military, I don't think military work that way, and I don't think that's likely to be the case as such. But nonetheless, it's interesting the way those stories surface. I've heard of Australians speaking this, that story going around in political culture in Australia, that the rebellious, bothersome Aussies were placed to Gallipoli for a particular reason. But it does show, I think, that sense of uncertainty that permeates much of Unionist, Loyalist political culture, that uncertainty about the relationship with Britain. And I think that question, that query that the person gave to me reflects that, which still is deeply there. Thank you very much.